So I asked John to stick around for just a second. I know he does have to leave. Could you bring up John's slide again? Is that possible to do quickly? So, of course, we were having a discussion in the lobby just before this, and General Quinlan pointed out something very appropriate. You know, that slide that had the 21% of aviation modernization there, and he said, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So I appreciate John pointing that out, and especially in front of all of my CoE pals that are out here, who also have portfolios to manage. But in public, I just wanted to tell you, John, and all the folks in the G8, thank you. So now you can you get on about your schedule. I appreciate you coming. Okay, welcome all of you to the Hot Topics. It's pretty important that we do this. I think, as well highlighted by John, you know, there are many challenges out there right now, and we need this dialogue. We need this constant or consistent understanding across all of DoD and industry to be able to do what our nation needs us to do. So I greatly appreciate you all being here. General Swan, thank you. And to all the distinguished guests out here, thanks. So, you know, aviation has provided a unique capability for our Army, and since its inception during World War II, it has changed significantly. But what hasn't changed is its founding ethos and our purpose for existence, and that is to provide the best quality support to our ground forces humanly possible. We focus solely on their needs. And that's, you know, I'm very appreciative that Eric Wesley's here from the Maneuver CoE. I tell folks all the time, there is no aviation warfighting function. It's the movement maneuver warfighting function, of which aviation is a part of. And we have to stay completely in sync and wedded to his plan and his strategy as well. But we know that our forces are, and I'm not going to use slides, so you can stare at that slide all you want to. It's a pretty slide, but I'm not going to use any more slides. You know, our forces are absolutely engaged every single day. You heard John mention 88% committed right now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But if you look today at where we have our forces in support of combatant commanders and in support of other missions, it's pretty staggering. We still have elements in Afghanistan with the 16th Cab, with portions of 3rd and 4th Cab with them as well. We still have forces in Kuwait and Iraq that are very well committed with the 29th Cab. We still have forces in Europe with 10th Cab and elements from 1AD Cab doing incredible work across the entirety of Europe, stretched literally from Estonia all the way to Romania. And it is amazing to see the impact they are having. We have rotational forces in the 1/6 ARS in Korea that is augmenting forces there. We have 20 different states pitched in to assist in Hurricane Harvey with the Texas National Guard and the 36th Cab. Pretty staggering how much we have going on. And we mentioned today, you know, the Huntsville chapter is monitoring this on live streaming. Huntsville, thank you very much, because today Fort Rucker is flying 110 helicopters out of Fort Rucker for Hurricane Irma. And we get great support across, you know, Fort Campbell, Huntsville, Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and other places that we will soon begin to populate in earnest. When you look at how committed we are, that 88% describes every operation, every rotational force, all of the 58 different kind of major training exercises, combat training center rotations that our forces are taking place in. If you look back to Desert Storm in 1992, the Aviation Branch had about 9,000 rotary wing aircraft. Today, it's less than 4,000. But you see this requirements continue to grow as we're 88% committed. John rightfully pointed out that our buying power and our modernization budgets have come down almost 42% just since 2012. So there is a huge growing delta in capacity and capability for us to provide world-class support to our ground forces. And that is something that we absolutely have to address. It gives little room when we fund readiness today for modernization in the future. And if you look at what the future battlefield is going to be, TRADOC does a very good job of defining sort of what that operating environment will look like in contested and multiple domains. We will face anti-access area denial, integrated air defense systems. We will have dispersed operations with the need to operate dispersed, come together for effect, and further disperse for survivability. We look at a requirement to be expeditionary because we are not postured to solve major things right now. You hear that all the time. We have got to be able to operate in a future battlefield that will be significantly more lethal, significantly more complex in terrain, mostly defined by urban areas. We know studies have said by 2050, 80% of the Earth's population will live in urban areas. That is a problem. And we have to be able to optimize to address that and to fight in that. But when you look at these challenges, you can't look at them and say, well, how about that? That's going to be tough. We should probably not fund modernization. I think we have to take a significantly different look at it. We know in a future lethal, complex, contested environment, we have to modernize. But we do have to think about modernization a little differently. When often we speak, and I recently said at Industry Days that you hear enough of us where we talk about required capabilities and what our needs are and where our priorities are. But the reality is the requirements of aviation will remain unchanged. We find stuff, we move stuff, and we kill stuff. But we do have to bring in capability that allows us to do that better. It is refreshing and very positive to know that our senior leaders get it. They know we have to modernize. So when we talk our needs or priorities in terms of reach, in terms of protection, in terms of lethality, we get great support, but without a budget and without funding, it's almost, it's a challenge to actually get to fruition. Now, we do have to continue to build our current readiness. We do have to bridge our legacy fleets to allow for our ability to modernize and retain overmatch in the future. So the needs haven't changed, the priorities don't change, the challenges, however, are many. I'm going to give you a little context for one of the challenges that I'll describe. So when we say that we are a concept-based, doctrinally driven Army, which is a fact. General Perkins says often the intellectual must precede the physical, therefore we develop concepts. That then drives acquisition programs or requirements to meet a concept that take 12 to 15 years to come to fruition. before we even go to low-rate initial production. And we are crushed by the challenge of scale. So if we have large formations with high volumes of equipment, it takes 12 to 15 years to produce. The threat that we're trying to counter was predicted to be at a certain point. By the time we field anything, the threat has already changed. So if you're familiar with Moore's Law, that every 18 months technology will double, we will always shoot behind the flock. And because of scale, it will take us 40 years to field the Army. Imagine 2,135 Blackhawks in our inventory, with a max production rate currently of 50 aircraft at the ceiling a year. I was not a math major, but it takes a long time to replace all those aircraft. So we will spend the last 37 years fielding obsolescence. We have to change how we do things. We have to change how we introduce capability. We have to change our aversion to mixing fleets. So if you think of a modernization program as introduction of capability, not as replacing legacy systems, that's the only way it's achievable. So we want to introduce a capability rapidly to solve a specific problem. We will determine later whether or not we tweak that thing and make it better, or whether or not we go in a totally different direction. But our nation cannot afford our services going in a replacement strategy versus a capability introduction strategy. We have an aversion to mixed fleets. There is a complete myth out there that common must be better. We've never had a common fleet. How do we know? In the history of our nation, we've never had common fleets of equipment. And if you drive to commonality, you field obsolescence. And we have to just think differently about it. Now, John did also, point out some of the shortcomings in the acquisition process. There are things we need to change, and I'm not going to talk further about the testing and the cost estimating and where we have challenges there. But I did think it was pretty illuminating, the description from one of our PEOs that said, hey, if we had the thing sitting on the shelf, ready to field, it would take us 3 years to get through the contracting challenge. That is absolutely staggering to me, and shocking that, our nation, we are better than that. And we have got to find ways to become more efficient. One of the ways I think we need to become more agile or efficient is how we view government's role in future systems. I would contend the government has to have more ownership in things like the system architecture of any platform we put out there. I'll describe for you one of the huge challenges we have is every time a company has a new technology, 99% of the time it comes with a new A-kit requirement that we have to put on an aircraft that brings battalions in Forces Command to their knees. We're 88% committed. We're having to take aircraft away from ForceCom to bring down to put a new A-kit thing on it so that we can take a sensor. We need to define what is the industry standard. What is the standard of record for everything that is built to be integrated onto a platform? And industry builds to it. And when we say, hey, I like that one better than that one in a very rudimentary sense, I can just plug it in and it works because you built it to the standard that we define. We have got to do better at that. So if you're 88% committed, and we're constantly taking Forces Command units to their knees to field capability. To FORSCOM, it's not really fielding capability. You're depriving capability to a combatant commander right now. So that is an area we have got to solve. We have to understand what requirements really matter. I love it when folks say, well, Gayler, if you guys just defined requirements better. And I go, hey, that's awesome. Yeah. Here's one for you. If I were to say the requirement we want is better than we currently have in terms of a capability to a combatant commander that generates options for employment, increases survivability and lethality on a future battlefield, that's it. But we want, give me the exact speed, the exact range, the power to the 0.005%, the fuel consumption to the number, and it's very difficult to actually produce capability that way. What you do is you design something to meet technical specs that may or may not be capability. So if I were to say, hey, a future vertical lift aircraft has to fly X speed and give us Y range, that's mildly interesting. That's the value of a variable. A value of a variable is not capability. But if you understand the relationship of the variables of speed, range, payload, power, endurance, size, cost, and how they bring capability, improve survivability, and lethality, that is what matters. So I'm not looking for an exact knot that we say we're going to fly. It's a range or a sliding scale that whatever sweet spot gives the best capability to solve a problem to introduce to the Army, that is what we're trying to achieve. That's very difficult to test. That's very difficult for people to cost estimate. That's very difficult in some people's minds for industry to build to. I would say, not really. You have experts. You can figure it out. You understand the relationship of variables just like any of us would. And that's how we got to start thinking about what capabilities we want to bring into the Army. Now, we also need to do a better job of coming to consensus on what it is we want in a future platform in terms of autonomy. We often say our desired term is supervised autonomy. We think you need to go more to aiding the human in the loop and off-burdening the pilot than replacing a pilot. So imagine, if you will, a system that could see terrain, that could see obstacles, that could detect emitters, that could sense hostile fire, that could then fly survivably at terrain flight altitudes. The sensor package, the radar, lidars, the entire build of that platform would be enormous. Or if not enormous, incredibly expensive. At which point we would be able to afford like 6 of them. And quantity at some point has a quality. Capacity is capability in a major fight. So we've got to find a balance. And supervised autonomy is where we think we need to pursue capability. So it is optionally that the aircraft could fly to do a particular mission, but it dawned on us as we're reading daily sit reps out of Afghanistan, and the majority of engagements against an enemy are dynamically retasked. Meaning a human in the loop says, whoa, hey, there's something going on here. I need to adjust my mission and go solve that problem. With an automated, fully automated system, the only way to affect that is to have ones and zeros going through the air that some human in the loop remotely is causing a change. And on the modern battlefield, with the EW threats we know that will be there, no ones and zeros will be going through the airways. It is too easy to deny. So we could pursue technology that ultimately was expensive and generated no capability. Technology alone is not capability. So a human in the loop, though, can say, hey, it's flying autonomously on a certain path, on a certain mission, and then, hey, I am going to override, redirect, solve a problem, and then continue with the mission. Imagine the implications on fighter management. You self-deploy the aircraft with a crew on board that may or may not ever have to touch the controls. Our point is, it's very easy to solve autonomy at altitude, uncontested. It's not as easy to solve terrain flight, contested capabilities. And every time pressured, I get a little flack for when somebody says, Gayler, when are y'all going to go fully autonomous? And I always say, it is inherently easier to unman cubicles in the Pentagon than it is a rotary wing aircraft. Let's start there, and then we'll make progress. But these are complicated systems. But ultimately, we owe it to our forces on the ground to introduce that capability. And I would end by saying, we are completely engaged, the Aviation Branch, and it is it's staggering, and it's a bit inspiring to watch across the globe what our soldiers are doing in support of a ground commander. We know that any fight in the future, the requirement to be there and the need of aviation and how we fight in an air-ground operated environment is critical. And it will be critical. And whether we solve our modernization challenges or not is immaterial, because we're going and we're fighting with what we got. But we can do better. And that is our path and our urgency is that we've got to find ways to do it better, faster, and cheaper. Now, we've got some great panels that'll be up here today on movement maneuver, battlefield challenges, future battlefield challenges, the S&T environment and sustainment. So please engage these panel members. To all of my great friends that came to sit on these panels, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time to be here. I know your schedules are pretty light. You got a lot of options out there, but I do appreciate you being here with us. So on a time check, I don't know if I have, I can take a couple of questions, absolutely. I brought this especially for that. Says, you say perhaps we need to focus less on fleet commonality as we drive towards future vertical lift. What does that mean? For example, the idea before was to pick one airframe and scale it up or down from light to heavy. But is it possible now for the Army to consider a completely different aircraft for light versus a medium or heavy in future vertical lift? I would say it is absolutely possible for us to envision different aircraft. We're looking for the capability and the relationship of those attributes that provides the best capability in its class. So, though they could scale up, down, doesn't matter. It may not scale up better than the one that scales down. So I could envision introduction of capability of several different variants that look distinctly different. Again, I'm not wrapped around anything but the capability. whatever balanced capability gives the best to the ground commander. Our challenge, though, frankly, is can you pursue those simultaneously? And in today's budget, there's no way without some significant adjustments. And John George mentioned one of them. Without fleet buyouts of the 64 and the Black Hawk, there is no money. 58% of our entire budget's wrapped up in those two programs. So we've got to kind of break the habit a little bit. The next question was General Bunch, Department of Acquisition, Air Force has mentioned Rapid Capabilities Office to streamline development activities and Pathfinder programs to speed implementation of new programs. Is this consistent with the Army's plan? Absolutely, it is. In fact, Al Schaffner, I think Al's still in that shop right now. I know he's, potentially on his way out the door. And Walt Pyatt did some incredible work in the Rapid Capability Office. Really kind of in its sweet spot, it is smaller scale niche capabilities. It's not major acquisition programs. But some of that niche work does inform greater programs that hopefully we could streamline. So we are absolutely pursuing that, and we'll continue to do so. So, any other questions out there? And there'll be plenty of time to ask questions on the panel as well. Okay, I got one there. You got 1 minute for your question and my answer.
General George talked about not sort of trying to modernize a lockstep, get commonality. General George talked about breaking the tyranny of a modular one-size-fits-all cab. What does the alternative look like? Is it cherry picking certain units to modernize more? Is it tailoring certain units to their theater? What does it actually look like as opposed to let's buy X or anything for everybody?
Sure. So one, there's analysis that goes into what capabilities need to be resonant in what type divisions. For example, completely pre-decisional, the Army's still in the study phase, but it may be determined that light divisions need to look different than heavy divisions, need to look different than air assault or joint force entry divisions. And do we need a capability at an echelon above division, at Corps? Because currently there is no aviation force at an echelon above Corps, or a division. So that would have implications on the number of Black Hawks, numbers of Chinooks in each formation, number of Apaches in each formation, and that study is ongoing, and completely pre-decisional, but yeah, they would be different and tailored for role and mission of the formation to which it supports. So, okay, thank you all for most of you not falling asleep. I do greatly appreciate you taking time to be here, and thanks again to the AUSA staff. Sir, thanks.